Good evening. Welcome to the first of two community workshops regarding the City of Placentia's 2021 Housing Element Update. As I just mentioned, this is our first community workshop. We have had informational study session before Planning Commission. And after tonight's workshop, there will be a second community workshop on September 16th is the date. And that would likely be another combination in-person and Zoom meeting. Just for everyone's information, we are live down at the Witten Center here at in the wonderful city of Placentia. And we are also, of course, broadcast via Zoom. So before we get started with the presentation, we get the next slide, Eric. Sorry. Oh, thank you. So I would like to have some introductions first. With us tonight, we have our mayor, Craig Green, in attendance, and also council member, as well as council member Rhonda Shader. And we may have other elected officials watching online as well. And we also have our city administrator, Damian Arula, as well as other city staff. Again, if I haven't said it, my name is Joe Lambert. I am Director of Development Services, and under my jurisdiction is Planning Division, as well as Building, Code Enforcement, and portions of Economic Development. And the topic tonight is our housing element and the proposed housing element update, which of course is one element of the general plan. And the goal for tonight is to receive public input, answer any questions anyone may have. And again, there will be another community workshop just like we're doing tonight. And then we also plan to have, of course, we'll also have, we're planning to have at this point, a study session or a regular agenda item at a late September city council meeting, and probably a late September planning commission meeting, culminating with planning commission and council considering a draft element in October. And so tonight's presentation will actually be given by myself and our consultant, John Douglas. John is attending this workshop via Zoom, like many of our participants. And but he will be at future workshops and or hearings in person. And as you can see, the purpose tonight will just to educate the public in our attendance on housing elements. And then we, of course, we will have stakeholder input, and we'll get to the needs of the community and go through the schedule in more detail. Sorry, we get the next slide, Eric. And so with that, I would like to introduce John Douglas. He is our main consultant for the city of Placentia's, what we're calling the 6th cycle housing element update. John, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me, Joe?
Yes, loud and clear.
All right, great. Well, thank you for that introduction. And I apologize for not being able to be with you in person tonight. But as Joe said, I will certainly be at future meetings and have a chance to see folks in person. So before I launch into the details of my presentation, the first thing I want to say is that the most important part of tonight's meeting is to hear from those of you who are in the community and who are listening and attending this meeting tonight. So we're dividing up the meeting into two parts. The first part, I'm going to go through sort of a very brief housing element a 101 presentation. I'm going to try to do that as quickly as possible. I know that some of you are very knowledgeable about the topic of housing and housing elements. And so I'm probably going to give not enough detail to suit some of you. And others may be joining the topic of housing elements for the first time tonight. And so I'll probably give too much detail. It's a very complex subject, and there's a lot of laws related to what cities do with their housing elements. So I'm going to try to move quickly and then leave most of the meeting for questions, comments, discussion, and so forth. So let me start off by saying that the housing element is one part of the city's general plan, and the city updated its general plan on a comprehensive basis just a couple of years ago. What is important about the various components or elements of the general plan is that under state law, they all have to be consistent. And so what's important for us as we go through this housing element update process is to keep an eye on other parts of the general plan. And if there's anything that comes up in the housing element that would cause an inconsistency with other elements such as land use and so forth, then the city is required to reconcile those inconsistencies. And there may be some things that we, even that we talk about later tonight, about the relationship between the housing element and other elements such as the land use element of the general plan. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Very briefly, the housing element has been in state law for a long time. It's been a requirement. There's an extensive body of state law that directs cities, the issues that cities have to address as they're going through the housing element update process. What's different about the housing element, one of the things that's different is that they must be updated on an 8-year schedule, unlike most other parts of the general plan. And so we're undertaking this process now for what's called the 6th planning cycle, which covers this year, 2021 out to the year 2029. And so that's the focus of this exercise. Let's go to the next slide. There are some guiding principles that are contained in state law on what housing elements must address. And I'm going to quickly go through those. The first issue has to do with things that the city can do in order to maintain and improve the existing housing supply. Now, Placentia has some older neighborhoods that are getting a little in need of maintenance and repair and so forth. And so that's one of the most important priorities of the housing element, is to address those concerns for maintenance and improvement of the existing housing supply. At the same time, there are growing housing needs in Southern California. And so the housing element has to look out 8 years into the future with an eye towards the additional housing that's going to be needed over that time period. And particularly the various types and income levels of housing for different economic segments, and also different types of housing for persons with special needs. And I'm going to say a few words about special needs in just a moment. The other thing that the housing element needs to do is look at potential constraints to the production of housing, and particularly those things that the city has control over. And that is mainly things like zoning, development standards, height limits, parking ratios, development fees, the process for reviewing and approving projects, all of those things that are within the city's purview, and they could pose a constraint to the development of housing, and particularly affordable housing or housing for persons with special needs. The issue of fair housing has always been an important one, but it's taken on even more importance in the last couple of years. And there's a requirement called affirmatively furthering fair housing that is much higher profile with this housing element update than it has been in previous housing element cycles. So that's going to be a focus of this process. And of course, public participation. State law requires cities to proactively encourage the community, and particularly those persons and groups that are representative of the lower income segments of the community or persons with special needs. And so cities need to be proactive in reaching out to those lower income groups and special needs groups to ensure that their concerns are incorporated into this process. Next slide, please. So when we use the term affordable housing, I just want to quickly describe what we mean by affordable housing. This chart shows the different income categories that are established in state law related to housing and the income levels of families in our community and what is considered to be affordable in terms of rental rates or sales prices. So if we look, for example, at the blue row, the middle row of this chart that says low income, I'm just going to use that as an example. In state law, there is a definition for low income, and that means families whose income is no more than 80% of the county median. In Orange County, that means a family of four whose income is no more than $107,550 a year. Now, I don't know about you, but low income, I'm kind of shocked when I see that in Orange County, low income means $107,000 a year for an annual income. But that's what the statistics are. Now, state law also says that in order to be affordable, housing, the cost of housing should not require more than 30% of a family's gross income. So if we take that hypothetical low-income family who makes $107,000 a year, what's considered to be an affordable rent in Orange County is $2,689 a month, and that includes a utility allowance for a rental, either a house or an apartment. So that is the upper end of the range for what we call low income. Now, if you look at the other income categories, and there's a lot of attention paid to the very low and the extremely low income categories when we go through the housing element update process. And so you can see that at the very low income range, the maximum rent is just under $1,700 a month. And at the extremely low income category, it's about $1,000 a month. And these figures are benchmarked to a hypothetical four-person family. So the numbers are higher for larger families and they're lower for smaller families. But these numbers that you see on the chart are for a four-person family, typically a two-bedroom apartment. In the far right column is my estimate of what would be an affordable sales price for a condo at the moderate income level. And the reason why I've only put in a number for the moderate income level is because typically when affordable housing is done in for sale product, it's typically at the moderate income level because it's just too difficult to make projects pencil out, for sale projects at those lower income levels. So just based on some standard assumptions and rules of thumb and mortgage rates and that sort of thing, around $500,000, in my opinion, is a typical affordable price at the moderate income level in Orange County. And I should emphasize that all of these numbers are the same for all jurisdictions in Orange County, whether you're at the beach in Newport Beach or whether you're in Santa Ana or Fullerton or Placentia or anyplace else. They are countywide numbers that are published by the state. Okay, let's move on to the next chart, next slide. And I want to highlight what I think probably the key requirements are as cities go through the housing element update process. The first is cities are required to review state laws and make sure that their local regulations, primarily in the municipal code and the zoning ordinance, are consistent with the latest changes to state law. And I'll talk about some of those in just a second. But the focus is on persons with special needs. And there are some particular laws related to different types of housing for persons with special needs. And so that's going to be one of the things that we emphasize as we go through this process. The second issue is the regional housing needs assessment. And the RENA, as we call it, has received a whole lot of attention over the last year or two. And I know many people listening tonight have been actively involved in SCAG, the Southern California Association of Governments, and the RENA process over the last couple of years. What's the main thing to keep in mind on the RENA, and I'll get into a little bit more detail on this in just a moment, but it relates to the city's zoning and the city adopting zoning regulations that create sufficient opportunity for housing to be built at least equal to the assigned RENA numbers. And I'll say more about this in just a moment. And then the third topic, affirmatively furthering fair housing, which, as I said, is a much higher profile concern with this housing element update than it has been in the past. And there are some core requirements of AFFH. One is outreach, and that is for the city to proactively reach out to all different segments of the community, income levels, different ethnicities, different groups, persons with disabilities, and so forth, in order to make sure that the interests and concerns of those folks are considered in this process of updating the housing element. We're also required to prepare a fair housing assessment, and that's doing a deep dive into the issue of fair housing in the community, the issue of discrimination, and so forth. Also new for this housing element update cycle is looking at the city's zoning and the availability of sites for housing development through the lens of access to opportunity. And so the law and the federal government and the state government are concerned that cities do their best to try to create housing opportunities, housing development opportunities in areas where there are opportunities for jobs, for good schools, for medical care and shopping and public transportation and so forth. So that's going to be one of the focus areas of this update process. And then all of those concerns that I just mentioned need to be reflected in the policies of the housing element in order to address the issue of fair housing and to promote fair housing in the community. Let's go to the next slide, and I want to talk just a little bit about what we mean when we say persons with special needs. So state law spells out a number of categories of special needs that we are required to study as part of the housing element, and you see those on the left side of this chart. So the elderly, persons with disabilities, large families, which means 5 or more persons in the household, the homeless, female-headed households, farm workers, and extremely low income families. And I mentioned a couple of slides back what we mean when we talk about extremely low income. So all of those are categories of special needs in the context of housing. And then on the right side of the chart, I've listed a number of types of housing that address the needs of those different groups. And so accessible housing for people with mobility challenges, but accessibility can also refer to location near jobs, near transportation, near shopping, and so forth. Residential care facilities for the elderly or others that have a disability. Transitional housing and supportive housing also intended to address the needs of people who have disabilities or may be homeless or at risk of homelessness. Emergency shelters for people who are in immediate need of a roof over their heads. There's a new category of housing called low barrier navigation centers that's been put into state law recently. And so cities are required to adopt zoning regulations that also allow the establishment of low barrier navigation centers. Affordable workforce housing, just what you might think of as conventional housing, but that is affordable to people in the workforce, people who have low to moderate incomes. That's a particular, a very large need, and particularly in expensive places like Orange County. Employee housing, which focuses on farm workers, not as important, not as critical an issue as it used to be in Orange County, as agriculture has kind of moved out and been replaced by urbanization. But nevertheless, farm worker housing is an issue that's in state law, and cities are required to adopt regulations to allow farm worker housing of various types in the community. And then the last item on this list, accessory dwelling units, ADUs may not be really thought of as a special needs type of housing, but when you think about it, ADUs, there's the phrase affordable by design, which is sometimes used in the housing industry. I think of accessory dwelling units as being affordable by design because they are typically small units and therefore may be much more affordable than ordinary houses and apartments. And because they're more affordable, then they can serve the needs of a variety of these different special needs groups. Okay, let's go to the next slide. And I want to say a few words about the RHNA. The RHNA is a fairly complex topic, and so I'm not going to go too deep into it, but I just want to touch on the high points. The essence of the RHNA is that the state assigns a total housing need for the region. In our case, it's the SCAG region, Southern California Association of Governments. At the beginning of each housing element update cycle, they assign one big number to SCAG. And then state law requires SCAG to go through an analytical process where they divide up that RHNA allocation from the state, and they assign a share to each city and each county within the region. And so over the last couple of years, SCAG went through the RHNA process, and they finalized that process back in March of this year. And each city within the SCAG region was assigned its need for this coming 8-year period. Now, what's important about that RHNA number that is assigned to the city is that through the housing element update process, the city needs to examine the potential for additional housing in the city based on the general plan, based on the zoning, based on development standards, and evaluate whether the city has enough capacity to accommodate the RHNA number that has been assigned to the city. And what's where the rubber meets the road, so to speak, is if the city goes through that analysis and concludes that there is not enough capacity based on current zoning to accommodate that RHNA allocation, then the city has to take proactive steps in order to create more capacity to fully accommodate the RHNA. And that's done through the process of maybe the general plan being amended and the zoning being amended. Let's go to the next slide, and I want to summarize the two main purposes that the RHNA serves in the context of the housing element. The first is the planning requirement that I just mentioned, and that's where we go through the city's available sites for housing and compare the capacity of those sites to the RHNA allocation. But then there's also another purpose for the RHNA numbers, and that's the ongoing production of housing. Now, there's a big difference between these two purposes for the RHNA. For the planning requirement, cities are obligated, they are required by law to create enough capacity to accommodate the RHNA through their zoning. That is a mandate. And if cities don't do that, then they are subject to a wide range of potential consequences. In terms of production, sometimes we see in the newspaper housing report card that the reporter will go through and publish the statistics of how cities are doing in terms of housing production compared to the RHNA numbers that they've been assigned. And oftentimes they'll use a letter grade, like, a certain city is getting a B or a C in terms of its production. Well, the state law regarding actual production of housing is quite a bit different than it is for the planning requirement. And the reason is because cities do not have full control over the development process. Cities have an important role through their land use plans, through their zoning, through their permits, and so forth. But if you don't have an interested property owner and an interested developer and a source of financing, then the housing doesn't get built, no matter what the city's zoning says. So it's we could think of it as being a team sport. Housing is a team sport where it requires the cooperation of several different public agencies and organizations, source of funds, public grant funds in some situations, but also the private sector, property owners, developers, lenders, and so forth. So in terms of the production, the state law provides that cities are not mandated to achieve their RHNA numbers, but in some situations, if cities do not achieve their numbers, then they could be required to offer fast track permit processing for some types of housing. So there isn't an absolute mandate that cities go out and build housing, but there are some potential consequences when cities do not achieve their RHNA numbers. So I want to make sure that everyone's aware of those two different uses for the RHNA numbers. Okay, let's go to the next slide. This slide shows what the actual RHNA numbers are for this sixth planning cycle. So the SCAG region, which covers all of Southern California except for San Diego County, because San Diego is a separate region for purposes of the RHNA. So the SCAG region was assigned over 1.3 million additional housing units for this 8-year period. Orange County's share of that was about 183,000 housing units, and Placentia's share was 4,374 housing units over the next 8 years. So again, what that means is that Placentia needs to examine the potential for additional housing based on its land use plan, zoning, development standards, and so forth, and analyze that at a parcel specific level in the housing element, and then make a determination as to whether the existing capacity based on the current zoning can accommodate the 4,374 units. And if it cannot, then the city's obligated to look at potential zone changes, which could be increases in allowable density. It could be changing the designation from property to from a non-residential designation like business park or industrial or something like that, to a designation that allows residential. We are right now thick in the process of analyzing the city's capacity, and I cannot tell you tonight whether the city has adequate capacity to accommodate that RHNA number. After I finish up my remarks, Joe's going to talk a little bit about the areas of the city where the most opportunity for new housing over the next 8 years is expected. Let's go to the next slide. So the RHNA number, in addition to that total number of 4,374, it's broken down into income categories. What's important to know about the different income categories is that under state law, the very low and the low income categories are linked to density. And so when the city evaluates its potential for additional housing, what state law says is that in Orange County, you need a density of at least 30 units per acre in order to be feasible to build affordable housing, lower income housing. And so when we go through the analysis of the site capacity, we're going to be looking particularly at those very low and low income RHNA numbers and looking at the areas of Placentia where high density housing is allowed. And that's what's important about the different categories, income categories of the RHNA. Let's go to the next slide. So I just want to quickly summarize that the RENA is primarily a planning target. It's not a construction quota or a mandate. The important use of the RENA numbers for the housing element is to evaluate the city's capacity through the site's inventory. And the city needs to demonstrate that the site's inventory can accommodate the amount of housing that's assigned through the RENA. As I just said, there's a difference in the RENA between the lower income numbers and the moderate and the above moderate. And the lower income numbers can be satisfied in a variety of ways. It could be through multifamily residential zoning, like apartments and condos, as long as that zoning allows 30 units per acre. It can be satisfied through mixed use zoning or an overlay zone that allows housing when you have other uses like light industrial or business park, or a mix of uses. And then also accessory dwelling units, because as I was mentioning earlier, accessory dwelling units are oftentimes affordable just because they are smaller and less expensive than traditional housing. I want to emphasize, if there are any property owners that are listening to this presentation, that just because a property is listed in the housing element does not impose any additional requirements on the property owner regarding development of that property. The development of property is a private decision that the property owner can exercise or not as she or he sees fit. Also, if a property is listed in the housing element as a potential site for low-income housing, that doesn't mean that only low-income housing can be built on that site. Again, it's based on the density that's specified in state law. The bottom line, if at the end of this analysis, it's determined that the city does not presently have enough capacity to accommodate the RENA in all income categories, then rezoning is going to be required. Okay, so I'm going to pass the baton now back to Joe. That concludes my real quick overview, and I'm going to let Joe talk a little bit about the potential sites in Placentia where we think housing is most likely to be built in the future. Thanks.
Thank you, John. Appreciate that. As John mentioned, this slide highlights some areas of our city that that staff feels can accommodate additional housing units already. And this is prior to any change to our housing element, general plan, or zoning. The first one would be our TOD, or transit oriented development zone. And that is generally along Crowther Avenue, right up the street from the Witten Center here, from State Route 57, generally to almost Kramer Boulevard. So we've had in that area, residents may have noticed developments such as the Herald, which represents 215 units going up, and they have temporary certificate of occupancy right now for a handful of units, and the rest of them will be coming online very soon. We have another development under construction that's about 400 units, and then a third one that's 189 workforce housing units that has been entitled. And under my estimation, the TOD zone could easily accommodate an additional 200 units and probably up to 500, depending on which properties are developed over time. And just north of our TOD zone is the city's Old Town district. That's the Old Town Placentia, pretty well centered on the intersection of Santa Fe and Bradford. Several years ago, City Council adopted the Old Town Placentia plan, zoning and master plan, streetscape master plan, which is really the twin sister of the TOD, transit oriented development plan, which also has a very similar streetscape master plan. And right out of our CEQA environmental document for the Old Town Placentia plan, it states that it could accommodate up to 525 additional units. And in the Old Town Placentia zone already is an area on Baker Street, which is zoned for very high density, I think 65 units per acre by right, meaning it's a site that doesn't require any discretionary approvals. Of note, the TOD zone is very dense. It allows up to 95 units per acre, which in Orange County is extremely dense. Other areas of note, the City Council, to be consistent with the general plan that Council adopted in 2019, City Council also rezoned several areas south of Orangethorpe, east of Jefferson Street, to a R3 zone, which is 25 units per acre. And staff's estimation is that those areas could accommodate at least 500 additional units. Then there is some significant vacant land near the intersection of Alta Vista Street and Rose Drive, with some other infill parcels in that neighborhood could most likely accommodate, I said 100 to 150, but maybe even up to 200 units, not just on one parcel, but spread out in that whole area. Then, of course, there's infill development occurring on small parcels already. We have condominiums under construction called Brandywine up on Golden. Toffoli Investments was entitled for 139 units on South Van Buren Avenue. And as John, our consultant, mentioned, ADUs, or accessory dwelling units, are a very important part of the puzzle as well. They can provide housing and affordable housing, not just housing, but affordable housing, basically on every residential lot in the city could technically accommodate an accessory dwelling unit. And that's pursuant to state law, not just city law. And just, these aren't all of the available sites right now. These are kind of the main sites that came to mind. So I know if you add these up, it doesn't necessarily come out to 4,000, but we still have to finalize our sites inventory, working with John, and to figure out exactly what our existing land use plan and zoning plan can accommodate. And earlier I mentioned that Mayor Green, Councilmember Shader are in attendance. Councilmember Ward Smith has also joined us in person, so I wanted to welcome him as well. Okay, next slide, please, Eric. Thank you. So we're almost to the end here, but so I just wanted to highlight some key dates. We had a Planning Commission informational study session on June 8th. We're having community workshop number 1 tonight. There's a second one planned for, it's now set actually for September 16th, also 6 p.m. at the Powell Building, which is in Old Town Placentia. And we're going to be circulating a separate flyer for that as well. It'll be on our dedicated housing element webpage as well. And then tentatively, we have a tentative City Council discussion, regular agenda item, more informational, to discuss this very topic at the Council's September 21st meeting. At that meeting, though, we would likely not have any more information than we have tonight. I don't believe we'll have a draft element by that time. However, shortly after that, we may even have a special planning commission meeting late September, still to be determined. And then our goal is to have City Council review draft element on October 5th. Then after that, it gets sent to HCD, and if significant changes are necessary, we'd have another public review period, potentially other discussions. There would definitely be more discussions before Planning Commission and City Council, and ultimately City Council would adopt the final housing element. Although October 15th is the state's deadline to do so. Our plan is to get it up, our draft element up to the state before that time period. And there is a statutory extension in place. I believe it's 120 days. John will correct me if I'm wrong. And but the important part really is to get it up to HCD after public gets a look at it. And then after it is adopted and certified by the state HCD, which again is Housing and Community Development of the state, then city staff implements the housing element, and we have annual reporting. We have every March, we generally have a city council item where we present city council with all of the housing statistics, what's been entitled, issued building permits, and actually built for the calendar year. And after council certifies that, we send that up to the state for their use. Next slide, please. So we have a dedicated housing element website. The link is there. However, I will say if you go to the city's website and you go to development services, that's our department is development services, you will see a very obvious link to the housing element on there as well. And we have created a dedicated email address. DSD stands for Development Services Department at placentia.org, where we're happy to receive any comments via email. We also have a survey for anyone to take, which is online on our housing element webpage as well. And next slide, please, Eric. So this is the last slide. I did load here a image of our zoning map, just in case there are any questions as part of this workshop. But that is the conclusion of staff's presentation, and we're open for questions. John is available as well. He can also hear. Yes, ma'am. Certainly. Okay.
I've been there before.
Sure.
I wanted to know if we've had a lot of activity. And then my other question is where would the tiny house concept fall in the categories, or would it be based on what you like?
Okay, so Councilmember Shader asked if we have had a lot of ADU, accessory dwelling unit construction activity I'm assuming you mean lately or in the last several years. And her second question is about tiny homes, tiny houses, and how they might fit into this equation. So in terms of accessory dwelling units, in my opinion, in the last year or 2 years, we have seen more come in through plan check, but it's probably about, I would say, maybe 20 a year. My staff is nodding. So I think the last 2 years, we've probably permitted about 15 to 20 ADUs per year. However, state law is always constantly evolving on the topic of ADUs, and it's generally getting more and more lenient toward the construction of ADUs, which is neither here nor there, but which is to say that generally when the state is having more lenient ADU regulations, we do see slightly more activity. Regarding the tiny houses, if it is a dwelling unit, it can count as a unit for RENA. Would it be affordable or not? It really depends on the zone it's in. If it's in a single family zone, and it's of that size, I believe it could be justified as below moderate income. I don't think it may not necessarily be the low or very low or extremely low level of income. John, maybe you have some input on that question about tiny homes.
Yeah, I would just say that I remember in previous cycles, the question of modular or manufactured housing coming up. And I think in places like Orange County, it's the cost of land that's the deal breaker. And so even if you have a very small unit, if it's on a single family lot, then it's really tough to make that affordable. Multifamily is the most likely scenario, getting that land cost per unit down.
But John, I think Councilmember Shader has some clarification. If there was a tiny home development for rent, I'm assuming that is feasible and well, as long as our zoning were to permit it, and that those tiny homes could count as dwelling units for the RENA. Would you agree with that?
Yes, yes, they do count.
Oh, so what would make them count as affordable? I'm assuming it would have to be in the right zoning, a 30 acre or more, 30 units per acre or more. Only, well, if they're income restricted, like deed restricted, that's one way to get your affordable housing requirement. The other way is any zoning that is 30 units per acre or more is automatically considered affordable. So technically speaking, all of the developments in the TOD zone, no matter what the rent is, are considered affordable housing. Is that correct, John?
For planning purposes. And you might remember when I was going through my slides, I mentioned there's the planning requirement for RENA, and then there's the actual production. So for the planning, when we do the housing element to demonstrate that we have enough capacity, then yes, Joe is right. If the zoning allows 30 units per acre, then those properties can be considered suitable to satisfy the very low and the low income RENA.
So what that means is if there's a 5 acre parcel zoned for 90 units per acre and it's vacant right now, that's the credit we get. Okay. Any, Eric, do we have any hands raised or on the online? Okay. Yes, miss.
Is Placentia's allotment based on overall Orange County incomes, or is it based on Placentia?
The income levels are based on countywide incomes. Yes, so to answer your question, it's countywide. Yes, so that the numbers John shows on that page are assuming a family of 4. So for instance, it's this slide here. What is considered moderate income, which is the lowest level of affordability, or you could call it the highest level of the most expensive affordable housing, a family of 4 making $128,050 per year would qualify for affordable housing.
I would think that Placentia's income levels are probably low countywide. That doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter, but that's not necessarily, I don't know that to be necessarily true though. Okay.
Yeah. Barry Ross, go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you. I know that some cities in Orange County, in order to produce affordable housing, particularly when there's new housing being built, are passing either inclusionary housing ordinances or opportunity ordinances to encourage some units of affordability within other projects. Are those kind of policies going to be evaluated in this plan in order to ensure that there are there's ability to actually produce affordable housing?
Yes, yes, besides the RENA numbers and the affordability component, really the bulk of the housing element are goals and policies to achieve those goals. And things like inclusionary housing ordinances, having CDBG programs to help people, especially lower income families, fix up their homes to improve the housing stock. Those types of policies will absolutely be part of the housing element. And we have to also take a look at whatever ordinances and laws we currently have on the books. For instance, City of Placentia does have a density bonus ordinance on the books, but a true inclusionary housing ordinance we do not have. We do have development impact fees in place. When a developer is building a market rate project, they are subject to development impact fees for affordable housing already. But all of those components, yes, will absolutely be evaluated. And if there is an ordinance, for instance, that we do not have on the books and is either required by state law or helps us achieve HCD state approval, then that will be part of a essentially an ongoing reporting program or for us, for the city to achieve during the planning cycle. And the council in adopting the housing element would adopt a time frame for all of those to occur.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir. Yes, yes. Right. I had briefly mentioned that that we do not currently have a true inclusionary housing ordinance, but we have a development impact fee that Mr. Arula is correct. It does require any developer of market rate housing or non-affordable housing to pay a per unit fee. It's depends on the housing type, but they pay per unit into our affordable housing fund, and those funds are restricted and they're to be used for instance, the city could purchase a property and then turn around and sell it to an affordable housing developer. So we can use those funds for that type of thing, or we could commission our city-owned property or agency-owned property, and through the correct procedures and processes, transparency, we could go through a process to get a developer to develop it on behalf of the city as well. And we can use those funds for those type of things and for other ways to attract housing, affordable housing. Yes, ma'am. Elizabeth.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth. With the housing. I was hoping, I have two questions, so I can ask them separately or together.
Whatever you like.
Okay, so my first question is, what percentage of your affordable housing arena are you estimating that you're gonna meet with ADUs? And my second question is, it's actually more of like just sharing a perspective or sharing a comment. So tonight in Anaheim, or this afternoon in Anaheim, the development department presented to the city council the their site inventory where all this stuff is at. And their arena number is around 17,000. And they are zoning, they have identified capacity at this point for 37,000. And the thinking is that that is what is needed for no net loss, right? So that if a site that is 30 units or more to the acre gets developed into non-affordable housing, the regular housing, so that they don't have to go rezone again, that's what they're looking at. So I'm just sharing that as,
Okay.
you know, it's merely double, right?
Okay.
So I'm just sharing that because I know you were saying like that the numbers that, you showed the sites where that you can accommodate housing and of course we can add up, but you still have like a pipeline. So
Right.
I'm just sharing that, but like,
Okay.
does that even surprise me? I was
Okay.
thinking they do like 20% buffer.
Yeah.
I didn't think they were gonna do.
Okay, thank you. And to answer your first question about ADUs,
Don't forget to describe that.
oh, thank you. Thank you. So the question from Ms. Hansberg is how many ADUs or accessory dwelling units do we contemplate would be built? Like, for instance, are we assuming every residential property would have an ADU? To answer that question, I actually haven't got to that level of detail yet. In my opinion, I would assume that most residential properties could accommodate one. And just FYI for everyone listening, in the office, we were plan checking, there's an R2 or kind of duplex property that has 2 units on it right now. And so it turns out that pursuant to state law and our ordinance, that property legally can have 2 detached ADUs. It's in process right now. And, something like that would be shocking, 4 or 5 years ago. But today, that's just the way it is. So we are seeing a pattern of residents or people taking advantage of ADU laws. I don't know that I don't plan to, as the city representative, I'm not planning to rely 100% on ADUs, especially for affordable housing. But we just don't know yet. Correct. And Elizabeth's other comment for the audience was about City of Anaheim. And I believe the gist of it was that you're surprised that even though the arena number was 17,000, they really need to rezone for about 30 some thousand units. Okay.
So I'm just sharing that like when you take a look at your rezoning, don't rezone for 4,570 or whatever it is, because the no net loss provision is now counts
Okay.
in the way that it didn't in the past. And so I'm just sharing what I've heard. Could you explain that?
No net loss is a new state law, correct?
Yeah.
Whereas essentially, let's say the zoning is 10 units per acre, and then you're zoning it to 30 units per acre. You have to assume, correct me if I'm wrong too, Elizabeth, that the net there is 20 units per acre, not 30, because it used to accommodate 10, now it accommodates 30. So that's a difference of 20. And we would only get under the net zoning provision. We only get credit for the new zoning.
Okay, so the spirit of that law is just.
Correct. It's a no double dipping.
I did not know that. My understanding of it was, that may go, you're probably right. My understanding of it was that in practical terms, what it's supposed to do is, if the city has identified, 5 sites for affordable housing at 30 or more dwelling units per acre, and then all of them get developed, or whatever, say like 3 of the 5 get developed at market rate, and then we have to find space for more affordable, because none of them became affordable.
Right.
So you have to have capacity for whatever, in your progress, whatever the difference is. Does that make sense?
Yes, that does make, yes.
Okay, so that's I guess I understand it more in practical terms than the exact legal rules, or maybe it's 2 different things.
Yes. Okay.
It makes sense.
Yes. So either way, I'm happy for those lessons learned, and I'll probably reach out to City of Anaheim to investigate that further as well. Make sure we stay on the right track. Yes, ma'am.
Community input on this, public input.
Sure.
Yeah, there's a slide.
Sure. We can go back. Yeah, there you go. Let's see. Yes, that's it. So, excuse me. My notes here. So we have a second workshop planned for September 16th at the Powell Building, again in Old Town. And then our plan is to have City Council as a body discuss the housing element tentatively as early as September 21st. And we've already had Planning Commission discuss it in general. And so at September 21st, it would likely be informational. I don't anticipate receiving council direction. It probably would be a receive and file at that time. However, we would like to have our Planning Commission review the draft element as soon as it's available, and that could be late September, early October. That date is not determined yet because it will probably be a special meeting. And when it's figured out, we'll definitely post it on our website as soon as we know and have all those dates posted. And then tentatively, October 5th, City Council would review the draft element. Probably not till the 21st. It's possible we may have some data by the 16th. Oh, thank you. So the question is, when will the city have data regarding the amount of units we need to rezone for potentially, or that we have? That's the sites analysis. Correct. So we're currently working with John. We are updating tables that we have as we speak. A lot of it's already happened. And I would say by September 16th, there's a good chance we'll have a much better picture of where we stand as far as where the current land use plan and zoning, what that leaves us with potential sites.
So did you say you're gonna do more advertising or something for the September 16th meeting? I mean, I know this impacts
Yeah.
other people on Zoom.
Or I also share with you that regardless of our, this is the type of show up.
We actually, this one was a, we actually started advertising even as much as 3 weeks ago for this one. About 2 weeks ago, we had a flyer circulated and we had our website finalized. That's why now that we have the September 16th date nailed down, those flyers are going to go out tomorrow. And
Like the only way I know about is when I used to.
yes, yeah, yes. And social media, it's been on the city's social media. Yes, I saw it on even LinkedIn, I believe, and some other outlets as well.
And then I think, did we have it?
The Palm? No, it's not in the Palm. That the lead time on that is it's too long. But yeah, we will. Yes, we will absolutely do everything we can to get the word out. Any more Zoom questions? Okay. John, anything you'd like to add?
No, I don't think so, unless there are any of the specific questions that you'd like me to try to comment on.
I don't think so.
If there's anything online in the audience that is looking forward to seeing anything in particular or not seeing.
Okay. So the question to the crowd in person and via Zoom is if there's anything that you are looking for in particular for our housing element to cover, or if there's any ideas you may have or questions about certain properties, or yes, or if there's anything you don't want that in your opinion is a non-starter, or there are things you do want, we would like to know. And I'll mention again on our website. Do we have paper copies? Yes, we have paper copies of the survey, and the surveys on our housing element website as well. Anyone can take it. So yes, if anyone either here in person or online has any expectations for us, questions, as Councilmember Shader stated, things you would like to see or things you definitely don't want to see, please let us know, whether right now or okay. As one of our planners has reminded me that on the survey, which is in English and Spanish online currently, there is a comment section on the surveys in which you can freestyle your comments as well. So there's a series of questions, but then there's also areas where you can provide whatever input you'd like. Yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry, I keep asking.
No problem. We need it.
What is the role of the survey in the whole process? Like, the results?
It's another tool for public participation. And the findings so the results of any survey will it'll be part of staff reports that go to Planning Commission and City Council. So any of your input will definitely be forwarded to the policymakers. So in my opinion, it's very important. So it's
not a random survey of city members, right? So, I'm sorry, I was back.
no, it's completely random. Anyone can take it. It's
So it's not, it's the people who are most interested that would.
yes, I would assume so. Whoever's interested in taking the survey.
And I think we see it as another tool to start people attending. You know, it's another tool for us. So, yeah, it's another. So that all these links just came to us, I think today or yesterday.
Hmm.
So we'll be pushing.
I like referring to this another tool.
Yes. Okay.
You just say you deserve a lot of credit for making your community meetings accessible online. That's great.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, it's, I was a little worried that it's kind of a hybrid, but I think it's worked out well.
So if we had 10 more people in this room, we'd probably feel more full, right?
Right.
So that's good to know.
Yeah. I can tell you when we use this room for our whole entire general plan update for, I think, 2 workshops, and I feel like we did a lot of advertising for that as well, a lot of lead time, and I think we have more participants tonight. So
But I'll tell you this. People are nice to each other. Like that's, I disagree, but at least you're nice to each other.
We
So
are.
it's
And
a pleasure to come
I
here.
think we have a lot of trust. in the
Yeah, it's
community,
great.
because we hear from them when they're concerned.
Right, we do. No, it's a functional council, which is like a miracle.
Joe, did you want to just repeat that? I'm just kidding.
the member of the public stated we have a functional council. Yes. We're not naming names of other cities though. Just west. Okay. So unless there are any other questions from our online audience, yes, sure. Again, it's going to be September 16th, 6 p.m. at the Powell Building, which is which is the old city library, actually, on Bradford and Center. Yes, Powell Building is also known as the Senior Center. Yes, we will. Yep, absolutely. So thank you, everyone who attended in person and virtually. We sincerely appreciate it, and we look forward to your continued input.